Hello everyone, Danny here with a little more of an in-depth video covering the costs associated with our move to Mexico. You may have seen the video that Evan and I made last week. We made a two-part series, sort of more of a conversation style video covering our whole process from selling the house, moving to Mexico, and talking about the expenses. But because we're dealing with numbers and I am a very visual person, I thought it would be a good idea to come back with a follow-up and pull the numbers up on the screen so you can follow along easier. I have made a Steemit post with all the numbers and broken it into categories. So I'm going to pull up that post now so you can follow along. And because I am not really good yet with the sort of free flow, winging it style videos, I am mostly just going to read through this article, but it's pulled up on the screen here so you can follow along. We're happy to report we have now successfully completed the process to become temporary residents in Mexico. We have these cute Residente Temporal cards to prove it. Some of y'all have expressed interest in learning about the costs associated with moving to Mexico, so I've created this brief overview. First, I should make an important note that the biggest expense associated with moving has been the sudden and unexpected farewell to our homestead, our beloved flock of hens, and our friends in New Orleans. I could calculate exactly how much of an income loss we took based on photography gigs lost due to the mandates and Airbnb bookings we had to cancel due to the house sale, but please understand it's absolutely impossible to put a true cost on losing one's home, pets, and livelihood, not to mention the stress and grieving process. That being said, here are my calculations and a brief explanation of the process. The first section here is immigration documents. $135 each to renew our U.S. passports for 10 years, $45 each for our temporary residency visas, which we obtained from the New Orleans, Mexico consulate, $30 each for the FMM temporary visa from INM at the border for 30 days, $200 each for our Residente Temporal ID cards from the INM in Puerto Vallarta for 1 year, $190 each for our immigration lawyer's fee, and we spent approximately $100 on various passport photos, copies of documents, prints, and parking at various government offices. Not all of that expense was fully necessary. We were going off of the requirements listed on the Mexico consulate and the INM websites, and those are not all completely accurate. So some of that $100 for various things was expenses that weren't necessary. Moving down to necessary preparations, we spent $0 opening 2 new bank accounts, which don't have international fees. If you haven't traveled internationally, you might not know that if you use your American debit card outside of the country, most banks have a fee per transaction plus a percent of the total cost of the transaction. We learned that when we went to Montreal for our honeymoon. So we opened 2 new bank accounts to avoid those fees. We opened I believe it's pronounced SOFI, S-O-F-I account that has an international debit card that has no fees. However, it does have ATM fees. So to avoid fees for withdrawing cash pesos, we opened a Charles Schwab account, which we do get fees if we use the Charles Schwab debit card at the store, but we have no fees for withdrawing cash pesos from the ATM. So by using both of those 2 new accounts, we're able to both swipe our card for transactions and also withdraw cash from ATMs without having any sort of international fees. We spent uh, the next two combined, we spent $165 opening what's called a digital Nomad mailbox. We used the company iPostal One. It's basically a PO box with added features. It's like a PO box, but you have an actual street address. I've never had a PO box, but you'll notice there's certain things that you can't use a PO box for. It specifies street address only. So by opening a digital Nomad mailbox, we were able to obtain a New Orleans street address. Our mail is forwarded to this address, and whenever anything arrives for us, the company sends us a photo of the envelope, and we have various options such as having them open and scan the inside of the documents, deposit checks for us, or if it's a package, we can arrange to have it forwarded to us. So it costs $99 for a year. The initial verification process to open the account involved going to an online notary to verify that we are who we say we are, and I also pre-purchased 10 mail scans because we knew we were going to have some important checks coming that we would need to have scanned and forwarded. So it's $99 for a year, and then the initial opening and process of the account was $65. Under that, we spent $1 for the United States Postal Service change of address to change our address to that new digital mailbox street address. We also spent $2 each at dmachoice.org, which is the website that you use to opt out from junk mail lists for 10 years. It's a clunky little website. As far as I know, it's the only one you can use. I did use it about 10 years ago, so it was time for me to renew anyways. The reason this is important when you're opening a digital mailbox is because, at least with iPostal One and some of the other companies I was looking at that provide the same service, you're allowed a certain number of letters to your address per month before you start getting extra charges for them. And Evan and I were getting a lot of junk mail, so again, it was time to do the opt-out again to sort of wipe the slate clean. But also in spending $2 each, we're saving ourselves from future costs of receiving more than the allowed, I think it's 30 items per month to our digital mailbox. And we spent $0 to opt out from the national pre-screened loan and credit card junk mail lists. You can do it online and opt out for a couple of years. I don't remember exactly how long. Or you can additionally print something out and mail it in which case you will be opted out from the pre-screened mail lists indefinitely. The next section here applies to us only. It's probably not going to apply to anyone else moving internationally, but we spent $225 for a final appointment with my Lyme doctor, in which he gave me a clean bill of health. I can go more into that later. I'm considering myself to be in remission from Lyme right now, but I do still have some issues with at least one co-infection. So this final appointment gave me a clean enough bill of health for international travel, as well as some paper prescriptions if things come up in the future. We spent $150 each plus postage for our hair mineral analysis, which we do twice a year. We can go into that later, but we did it a little bit earlier, so we didn't have to deal with figuring out how to get an envelope to ship internationally. So we went ahead and took care of that before we crossed the border. We also spent $225 to get a total of 3 COVID antibody tests. Evan's immediately came back just off the charts, And I took the test twice, and both times it came back inconclusive. So whatever. We both had it at the same time. And we got the test just for our own curiosity, and so we could have the results. Rational government body would look at antibodies. So that was just for, I guess, curiosity more than anything. And these next couple of sections have to do with preparing our car for the trip and actually importing our car and driving down. So these fees were incurred because we opted to bring our car with us versus flying. So we spent $100 on an oil change, $225 on a tune-up and a new tire, thanks to them running over a nail during the test drive. The actual documents needed to import our car, we spent $440 on Mexico car insurance for 1 year, which is significantly cheaper than what we were paying in New Orleans. And I should note that we received a $175 refund for canceling our US policy. We spent $380 on what's called the TIP, the temporary import permit. You have to stop at the border to receive, pay for your import permit, and $320 of this is a deposit that you, the length of time that you're in Mexico, you'll keep extending your tip, and then you get your deposit back upon exit of the country. And we also spent $20 each on international driver's licenses for 1 year. These are funny looking. They're like a little paper book, and they have one of our passport photos on it. These were recommended, even though they're not required for driving in Mexico or most of Central and South America. Just based on if you get pulled over or you get some sort of traffic infraction, the officers actually take your driver's license, and then you have to go pick it up later when you pay your ticket or fine. So it's recommended that you get an international driver's license so you can hand that over to the officer instead of giving away your United States ID card. So they were only $20 each. We opted to get both of those. The drive down, we spent $125 on a dash cam, $95 on a GPS, $175 on gas, $125 on tolls, and $215 on lodging. So we went, our trip started in New Orleans. We stayed in Houston for free, thanks to staying with some friends. We stayed in Santa Rosa, which is the border town in Texas, pretty close to the crossing that we chose, for $50. We stayed our first night in Mexico in Monterrey for $37. We stayed in San Luis Potosí for $31. Mexico City, we actually stayed for 6 nights, but the cost per night was $60, so I'm only including 1 night on this because the rest was by choice. And then going from Mexico City over to Puerto Vallarta, we stayed 1 night in, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, Tonalá, which is right outside Guadalajara, for $36. So you can see that Airbnbs are pretty cheap, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So let's take a look at necessary versus optional expenses. Everything that has 2 asterisks are the bare minimum needed to spend per person on the immigration process is $430. We highly recommend adding an immigration lawyer, which makes the total per person $620 to start a new life in Mexico. And then if you add in everything with 4 asterisks, which are our recommendations for mail forwarding, it adds an additional $190, but that's per family, not per individual. So some notes about importing a vehicle. Bringing our car added an expense of $1,920. So approximately, I'll round that in my mind to, it costs $2,000 to bring our car here. That includes pre-trip car preparations, international driver's licenses, dash cam, GPS, gas, tolls, lodging at each stop on the way down, car insurance, and the temporary import permit. 320 of that 2,000 is the tip deposit, which will be refunded upon exit of the country. And not all of the expenses listed are required. As I mentioned, we chose to get an oil change and a tune-up and a new tire, and the licenses aren't required. So of that $2,000, some of those were elected expenses. We saw the biggest benefit of bringing our car is that it allowed us to bring a decent amount of belongings. We filled the trunk and the back seat, and that saved us from the expense and stress of getting important items here a different way. If we hadn't driven, we would have incurred the cost of plane tickets, extra bag fees, and purchasing suitcases because we don't own luggage. And obviously, having a car has its own added benefits for exploring a vast new country, seeing a variety of landscapes, cities, and villages. A quick note about some upcoming expenses. So a few things that are not solidified yet with our move here is, according to our immigration lawyer, it's going to cost about $300 for me to move my photography business to Mexico. That includes the accountant that is required, lawyer fees, and I believe an additional fee to INM to adjust my temporary residency card. I'm not completely sure on the process, but she explained it to me verbally, and we are starting the process this week, so I can tell you more about that as we move along. And depending on where we decide is our final destination, it's going to cost us about $3,000 to $4,500 to get our pallet of belongings that is currently in long-term storage to us in either Mexico or Japan. Some notes about driving. It was highly recommended that drivers new to Mexico take a few things into consideration when planning their route. One, it's generally more safe to drive inland rather than coastal routes. Two, only drive as far as you can during daylight hours. Evan and I usually if we were on a road trip, we had a destination in mind. If we really wanted to get to Puerto Vallarta, and we weren't taking into consideration only daylight hours, we could have driven a lot farther each day, but we chose to break up our trip the way that we did. And three, it's recommended to take toll roads when given the option. Due to the prevalence of police officers soliciting bribes for real or imaginary driving offenses, it's also recommended to have a highly visible dash cam with an attention-getting cord hanging from the front window, which might deter them from corrupt behavior. That's the reason we bought a dash cam. We didn't own one before. As I note in the next sentence, we've already been pulled over 2 times. The first time we had our dash cam out, and the officer, after looking at our papers for a few minutes, waved us on. Second time we did not have the dash cam out, and the officer solicited a bribe in lieu of a ticket. So do with that information what you will. I should also note that we bought the GPS specifically because we didn't know how, we're trying to reduce time on our phones anyways, and we didn't know how Maps was going to work upon crossing the border. So we got the GPS so we could use that instead of relying on our phones. And I have some complaints about the GPS. I don't know if they're all as clunky as the one that we bought, but regardless, I think it was a decent investment for less than $100. Some notes about lodging. We chose our Airbnbs based on 1, proximity to places we wanted to see, 2, proximity to our driving route, and 3, making sure they had parking on premises. We didn't want to fully unpack and repack our car at every stop during such a stressful trip from New Orleans all the way to Puerto Vallarta. Fortunately, many homes in Mexico have small gated courtyards, which are used as either an extension of their living space or parking. So we only booked places on Airbnb which included off-street parking. That made it only necessary to unpack the very important items from the car, and even that was just for my own anxiety levels. But yeah, at each stop we unpacked my computer, our box of important paperwork, and a couple other things. It is important to note that while we thought our Toyota Camry was a small car, it was often literally just a few inches away from not fitting into these garages. So the country is designed for really small vehicles. Don't even ask about the parking garage in Mexico City. And if we stay, I hope to eventually trade our car in for a Vocho or VW Bug, which was amazingly produced in Mexico. The classic Bugs were made until 2002, and a scooter. I was pleasantly surprised that my motorcycle endorsement was transferred over with my international driver's license. So that is an option. Some notes about cell phones. Our cell phones cost $60, $30 each per month. Metro PCS has the option of adding unlimited Mexico and Canada for $10 or $5 a line per month. This has worked perfectly so far and gives us unlimited calling and texting to and from US or Mexican phone numbers, as well as unlimited data. The only thing it doesn't seem to do is allow us to send or receive photo texts, but either way it's a steal. It's possible that Metro PCS will only allow us to use this plan for 6 months. So once we get settled, pretty soon I'm going to have to start figuring out another option. Most people seem to use WhatsApp, which is what we've been using for sending photos, or they will switch their SIM cards out to a Mexican card or purchase a phone that allows you to use 2 SIM cards. And one of my goals for the year is to get a phone that is de-Googled, so probably going to be going the route where I'll either get a de-Googled phone that I'll just get a Mexico phone number, or a de-Googled phone that has dual SIM card slots. And now let's look at our timeline of events. We started this process suddenly in September 2021 as the threat of a national mandate ending Evan's career, after the New Orleans mandate had already effectively put an end to my career, was the final straw pushing us out of America. Prior to this, we had discussed the possibility of retiring in Japan or raising children in Japan, but hadn't even considered moving to Mexico. Over the course of 2020 and 21, Mexico started looking better and better because the country was almost entirely mandate-free and accessible by car. Evan gave notice to his employer, with his last day being 1 month prior to our planned move date. I continued to pare down my list of photography gigs in Orleans Parish, which would require running the risk of not having a negative PCR test on time and therefore a real chance of not being allowed to perform my contractual obligations. Any gigs that I could, I gave away to other photographers, and the remaining gigs caused an immeasurable amount of stress. We immediately started the process of listing our homestead for sale. I lost track of the high percentage of showings that turned into offers, but it was something like 75%. We received a half a dozen offers over the course of the listing. Our second almost buyers were absolutely perfect for our homestead, and we were really sad that they were unable to complete the loan process. But fortunately, we were able to get another buyer very quickly, and even though the close date was extended, it only ended up postponing our move date by 3 weeks. During this time, we completed the arduous process of separating all of our belongings into 3 categories. 1, stuff to sell. 2, a small amount of stuff we can live without for 1 to 2 years, which I mentioned earlier went into long-term storage and will eventually be shipped to us at our final destination in Mexico or Japan. And 3, the absolute bare minimum of stuff we need to take with us in our car. The first step of our immigration process was to apply for 1-year temporary residency visas at our local Mexico consulate in New Orleans. We printed and completed the necessary paperwork from their website, brought our financial documents, passports, and additional passport-sized photos. After a few hours at the consulate office, we walked out with our visas in hand. The visas are good for 1 border crossing, which must happen within 6 months of receiving the visa. We crossed the border early December 2021. Looking back, I can say it was a pretty comical experience, not what we expected at all. We didn't talk to a single person crossing the border. Nobody stopped us. Nobody looked at our car or belongings. Nobody even checked if we had passports or visas. We just drove across a practically unmonitored border. In fact, if we hadn't known from weeks of research that we were required to seek out an INM office to receive additional visa paperwork and a banjercito to purchase a temporary import permit for our car, we would have simply driven right past. The man selling peanuts on the side of the road saw us panicking, saw me panicking, and told us where to go. We spent nearly 2 hours at this location while the INM man and the banjercito man argued over the correct way to process our FMM and tip. We left feeling confused, only to be greeted immediately upon entering Mexico by some unbridled horses just chilling by the road. Wish I had pictures of that. It was great. We had planned a vacation in Mexico City for 1 week while we took care of the next steps of the immigration process with INM, as this process must be completed within 30 days. Upon arriving in Mexico City, we learned that all INM offices have a 2-week closure from December 18th to January 3rd, effectively reducing our 30 days to 10 business days. We also learned that the Mexico City INM did not have any available appointments until February, which is well after our 30-day mark. So after a few days of frantically trying to figure out how to complete this process without, getting deported, while simultaneously finalizing our house sale, a very stressful few days, we decided to contact an immigration lawyer we found on a Facebook group. She was able to pull some strings and got us an appointment in Puerto Vallarta for December 17th, the day before the INM offices closed for the holiday. Her nominal fee was well worth the stress relief. Then all we had to do was wait patiently to pick up our ID cards 3 weeks later, then have our car's tip extended by the aduana, which has been a little confusing, but overall not too bad. And that's it. Now we can contact an accountant and start the supposedly simple process of moving my photography business to Mexico. Looking forward, I hope to take this opportunity to shed some of my rigidity and learn how to be flexible. It seems like we would be well suited for house sitting, which would give someone the peace of mind that their home, garden, and pets will be well cared for in exchange for accommodations. We have our first house sit tentatively scheduled for April. We hope to see as many different parts of the country as we can through house sitting and hopping around to furnished short-term rentals. Having some garden responsibilities would hopefully lessen the feeling of loss and allow us to get our hands back in the dirt. We plan to live as frugally as we can, which is not proving very difficult, and after we have a few months of expenditure data, I plan to write a detailed post about the cost of living here. My estimate is that we'll be pretty far below $1,000 a month for all living expenses, which is good because we don't have jobs. Of course, we'll continue trying to start our family, praying for our first baby Benton and many more baby Bentons to follow. And in the meantime, we'll decide if we want to raise them on a new homestead here in Mexico or in Japan. As always, please let us know if there are any specific areas you'd like more information about. I'm considering making upcoming blogs and videos on the topics of the New Orleans mandates, our homestead and everything that we did there for the 5 years, and how we lived in our home for 5 years while breaking even on home income versus home expenditures. If any of those sound interesting to you, please let me know. Thanks for watching this video and reading the accompanying payment blog. If you're also considering becoming an expat in Mexico or elsewhere in order to escape the mandates or for any other number of reasons, I hope this has helped. Adios.